entendre ce que vous proposez pour entendre que cette discussion aujourd'hui et je veux vous accueillir très chaleureusement à notre réunion de brunch.
Merci beaucoup, Joyce.
So we had a series called MP Breakfast Connections, and that was 7:30 in the morning, Fridays once a month, and we would have experts coming in to present some ideas for discussion on a policy topic, one policy topic or another. Not always things that were hot topics in the community, but things that were of interest, because we have a very thoughtful constituency, many people who are well-educated, professional careers, and we even, but everybody interested in policy. So we pivoted our breakfasts to brunches because the biggest complaint I had about our breakfasts was how early they were. So now it's in Vancouver time, it's much more reasonable.
It's very civilized.
So we had some discussion here about whether to ask you to speak on environmental policy matters, because of course you're a very well-known leader in that space, somebody who climbed buildings when you were Greenpeace activist, but also went to Conference of Parties on Climate across the world for many, many years. So,
which is where we met for the first time about 17 years ago in Morocco for one of those United Nations conference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you were BC Environment Minister.
Yeah, we were just looking that up to see which COP that was. It was COP 7. And then I think you and I saw each other in a number of COPs over the years after that. Yeah. And I went with Minister David Anderson, and as the BC minister. You know, in all frankness, the premier I was working with, Gordon Campbell, was not a fan of the provincial ministers going doing international travel. He thought that that was the job of the federal government. And he was probably right, but there was nothing that was going to stop me from going to this conference. And so I went anyway. And David Anderson took me under his wing and had me involved in everything he was doing, unfortunately, including all night round the clock negotiations.
The good and the bad.
Yeah, yeah. So
speaking of environment, I mean, not that we can't comment on it because it's not official, but there's a story in the Star today which says that the federal government would invest $500 million to build the next Ford plant in Ontario, in Oakville, Ontario, which would be an electric vehicle plant. And if I'm correct, if not the largest in North America, one of the largest in North America. So it's not official. It's not official news, but it's in the newspaper.
Well, that makes it pretty official from my perspective. But that is so awesome. I mean, for us to sort of grab that and create some competitive advantage and really help to extend out the use of EVs is so important.
I mean, to credit to our colleagues who've worked on this in cabinet, but also to the unions who have pushed the Canadian auto sectors for many years, saying we need to go green, we need to go to electric vehicles because gas engines are out. I mean, they're not out tomorrow morning or the day after, but the direction is very clear. So really, I mean, Jerry Diaz and everybody at Unifor who worked on that, well done.
Okay, I'm interested. I bought a 3-year-old Nissan Leaf a couple of years ago. So it was at the very beginning, it was the first set of EVs by Nissan, and it has literally 120 kilometers of battery range, which actually works fine in a place like Vancouver. I put a high charging port in my backyard, and but someday I'm looking forward to one of these cars that has where I could actually go out of town on a charge. So, yeah.
Well, I don't have a car, but for my service vehicle, the car we were using, the lease was coming to an end, and we had to renew it or change. So I have ordered a fully electric vehicle as my service vehicle, which we should get in a couple of months.
Mm.
It's the Bolt, the Chevrolet Bolt, which has an autonomy of about 500 kilometers, roughly. So,
Yeah, no, they're definitely, I mean, it is so great not having to go gas up. I love that.
yeah.
So I see we're just about at the start of our meeting, and David, you're our moderator today.
I am. Yes. So we're about to get started.
Okay, do we have the bulk of our guests
We have a good amount signed in so far. So for those who are just joining us, welcome. We are very excited to have Ministers Guilbeault as well as Minister Murray here. We will get started in just a moment. Please mute yourselves. And at the very bottom of the screen, you will note that there's a Q&A button. You can ask questions into that. The questions will come to our office team, who will triage into the question and answer period of the event. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us. We will get started in just a moment.
So Stephen, while we're waiting for the official start, I will also say that Vancouver Quadra, which is the west side of Vancouver, if you know our city, it has a remarkable number of people that are involved in the arts and cultural industries. So a lot of film, television, live art, theater, and writers, and so on. So it's an important topic from another part of your portfolio, which so that you may receive some questions about the cultural industries as well, because that's so important here in Vancouver Quadra.
Yes, and I was only able to go once to BC since being nominated Heritage Minister, but I have had lots of virtual meetings with people in British Columbia, in Vancouver, that are part of the arts and culture sector, and have another one. Have another meeting with our colleague Eddie Fry later on today, with some of her constituents in that sector.
Yes, absolutely. Hetty is a longtime champion for the sector as well. While we haven't started yet, I'll quickly make a plug for the new Vancouver Art Gallery. The gallery has been seeking federal funds for a while and has a very cool plan, a relocation plan, and build of a modern art gallery. So important Vancouver request on the infrastructure side.
I have heard about it.
So we have a significant portion of those who have RSVP'd with us now. So without much more process, we'll get started. Please join me in welcoming our two special guests, MP Joyce Murray, Member of Parliament for Vancouver Quadra and Minister of Digital Government, as well as Minister Stephen Guilbeault, who is joining us today from Montreal, the Minister of Canadian Heritage. So Minister Murray, if you'd like to start us off.
Okay, well, thank you, David. And thanks everyone that's joined. I can't see you all, but I appreciate your presence in this meeting. Welcome to our MP Brunch Connections with Minister Stephen Guilbeault. And I want to acknowledge that we here are on the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish First Nation, the Squamish, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And yeah, so welcome. I'm really looking forward to our conversation about Canadian culture, essentially, and some of the frameworks for supporting it that Minister Guilbeault is so central to. Before we go into the meeting itself, though, I do want to acknowledge the recent death of Mrs. Aileen Chrétien, someone who I've had the privilege of knowing, and former Prime Minister John Turner, the Right Honourable John Turner, who of course represented our constituency, and was a very warm and welcoming presence when I was first nominated and elected in Vancouver Quadra, and often gave me tidbits of advice and offered to help me in any way that he could. And so I appreciated his generous approach to the new MP in his former ridings. So my condolences to both of our Prime Minister's families. So I often start with a bit of a briefing from Ottawa, but as you know, things are different than they were a year ago. I have had a chance to be in Ottawa last week, where there was a 2-day cabinet retreat, and also I had a chance to catch up with my ministry staff and quite a few meetings. I think one of the key things that I was working on there, just to bring you up to speed, is through this COVID-19 period of so many difficulties for so many people, one of the things that has been a learning experience and also a positive for me is to see the importance of IT, proper IT management and updated digital service, the importance of that in serving you better, serving Canadians better. So the CERB, for example, a program that in the past may have taken a half a year or a year to develop and roll out, was done in a matter of weeks. Credit to Minister Qualtrough and her team, but also to digital government teams and Shared Services Canada for making it possible. So digital and the area of responsibility that I have is really at the heart of everything we're offering as a federal government, because you can't have a policy without actually thinking about how to deliver it skillfully. And that's the interface. The delivery is the interface between you as a Canadian and the policy that we as a government are championing and implementing. So I've been talking to my colleagues like Minister Guilbeault and saying that just a reminder that whatever policies that we're championing, they need to be delivered well, and that is underlying IT and digital is at the heart of what we offer. So that's been my message, and I'm really, it's been an honor to work on this and to find a way to shift the delivery of services to people like yourselves on this call and others. So that is really what I think about and I'm working on every day. How can we do a better job? Can we get to a time when you can follow the progress of your transaction with the government, whatever it may be, that you can follow it easily or get notified of it easily, and you don't have to wait on phone lines, you don't have to line up at an office, you don't have to wonder where your application went. So working on those things, and it's been a lot of fun, and there's a lot of excitement in the digital government workforce on the opportunities that COVID-19's response is providing for us to accelerate the digital government transformation. So I'm going to now introduce our guest speaker. So Minister Guilbeault, bienvenue. Bienvenue à notre réunion MP Brunch Connections. Je suis ravie de vous accueillir ici à Vancouver, and you're someone who our participants are very supportive of and interested in for your green credentials, as we were talking about earlier. And now we're just so pleased to have you with us to talk about how we can have the web giants contribute to the cultural life and opportunities in Canada. And I know this has been this is a complicated thing that many countries wrestle with. Um, for our audience, Minister Guilbeault has been very effective as a champion of climate action and green issues, and he is bringing his capability, talent, and experience in getting things done to the heritage portfolio. And so I'm so happy to offer you the opportunity to chat with us so that the participants can ask questions and we can have a deep discussion about how we can improve Canadian arts and cultural opportunities in this age where things are changing so quickly and web giants become such a greater presence for all of us. So over to you, Minister Guilbeault. Welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Joyce. Ça me fait vraiment plaisir d'être ici. Thank you all for being here. I too would like to acknowledge that I am here in Montreal on the traditional territory of the Guilbeault Nation. It's not a well-known thing, but you and I have known each other for a long time, much longer than my arrival in politics, which is very recent. But I believe the first time we met was in 2003 at a United Nations climate change conference in Morocco, and have met and crossed paths often after that. So I like the title of your brunch meeting. Are web giants too big to regulate? I think was the title. I think it's a good question to ask. And before I dive into it, this is something I've been paying a lot of attention to for quite some time. My last book, which I published shortly before decided to jump into politics last year in middle of 2019, looked at positive and negative impacts of certain technologies like artificial intelligence, and I looked mainly at environmental impacts and social impacts. And when I started thinking about writing the book, the premise was that the increased use of artificial intelligence, while it would come with some environmental impact, like when we look at the amount of energy used by web servers or things like that, that they are ways to mitigate these impacts, but that by and large, the use of that technology would have large environmental benefits. The fact that we're moving not only towards an electric mode of transportation, but soon enough, automated mode of transportation will have enormous social benefit, the reduction of the number of accidents on our roads, cleaner air quality in our cities, less air pollutants, less greenhouse gas emissions. And I thought initially that some of the more damaging impact of technologies like AI would be around the workforce, and the fact that as we move towards automated transportation systems or automated production lines in the manufacturing sector, lots of people were going to lose their jobs, and that was going to be socially very difficult. And I still believe it's an issue, but it takes me about, I've written 3 books, and it takes me about 5 years to write a book. So after 5 years of research, the conclusion I came to was that, and the title of the book was AI, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And initially I thought the ugly would be this issue on workforce, and in the end I decided to put it in the bad category. But the ugly is the impact of artificial intelligence on our social fabric, and how through companies like Facebook and WeChat and Instagram and so many others, very large corporations with very deep pocket are having means never seen before in human history to control people. And we've seen, there are very big examples of that, and there are smaller everyday examples of that. But things like I mean, we know now that some of these tools, Facebook, Instagram, and others, have been used to try and manipulate election results in democratic countries. We've seen it in the last U.S. presidential election. We've seen it in the UK with the Brexit and the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal. And to me, it is clear, and the purpose of the book was to talk to people around the world, including European Union members of the European Parliament, who have looked at that. And the European Union is certainly pretty much ahead of everybody else when it comes to regulating web giants. They have put in place laws and regulations that other people are looking at mimicking. Certainly Australia, and I will get to that a little bit later, and us as well. So there's really three important things that the Prime Minister has asked me to do as Heritage Minister, and all three of them are linked to web giants. And the first one, as you were talking a little bit earlier, the role of some of these companies in funding arts and culture in Canada. So many decades ago, we created a system where we would, through a licensing process with the help of the CRTC, we would basically regulate Canadian broadcasters to invest some of their revenues in Canadian artists, in telling Canadian stories in both official languages, and more the last few years for other types of production, Indigenous production, for example. We now have an Indigenous Screen Office, which is, in my humble opinion, underfunded, and that's one thing I will work on in the coming months. And that system has served us rather well. And the idea of the system was really to try and protect our Canadian artists from the American invasion. We had in those days, we still have south of our border, an incredible arts and culture machinery that is very dominant in the world. And so we came up with this whole licensing system to try and protect our broadcasters in Canada from simply being swallowed by these American companies, and also protect the content that people can watch on TV and listen to on the air through the radio. Now, the last time we looked at those regulations was basically, not quite before the invention of internet, but close. It was the early 90s. So the internet was invented, but few people used it, and certainly nowhere near as much as we did today. And there's two things that have been happening that are really compromising more and more our ability to continue for Canadians to continue hearing Canadian stories. And those two things are, so those revenues that broadcasters invested in Canadian arts and culture were derived from people subscription to cable companies. And as we've moved away from cable onto digital platforms, either Canadian but also very largely international platforms like Netflix, like Amazon Prime, but also on the music side of things like Spotify and Apple Music. Well, our broadcasters, or Canadian broadcasters, have less and less revenue that they can invest in Canadian arts. And the other issue is obviously part of the revenues of those same broadcasters were derived from publicity dollars. And as we know full well, those publicity dollars are also being swallowed almost fully, not quite, but by web giants. About 90% of publicity dollars that were available for either Canadian media company or broadcasters are now taken by web giants. It's really Google and Facebook. So so there's really three goals that I'm pursuing. And one of the things I have committed to do is to table a bill that would reform the Broadcasting Act. Because I mean, this system that served us for many decades doesn't serve us very well. The civil service at Heritage Canada forecast that if nothing is done, they will be by 2023 roughly. They would be $1 billion less available to invest in Canadian arts and culture in Canada, and things that we can see on TV or on our screens or music, and which is quite dramatic. So what we intend to do is to table a legislation that will force the Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these companies I've talked about to invest, and we will regulate this. It won't be voluntary based. We will put in place a regulatory system where they will have to invest, so that there is more of an equilibrium between Canadian broadcasters and foreign-owned broadcasters, and that they can compete. I mean, obviously, these companies have very deep pocket, but not all of it invested in the Canadian market. So at least on the Canadian market, there is more of a fair competition between all of the players, which is not the case right now, because we have Canadian entities that are regulated, that have spending requirements in arts and culture, and you have on the other side those foreign companies which have very deep pocket and that are subject to no laws or almost no laws and regulations, certainly none in terms of investment. And this is what I want to change. I was hoping I would be able to table that bill before June. COVID obviously kind of monkey wrenched our legislative agenda, but I'm confident that I will be able to table it in the next session. In fact, unless there's a major catastrophe, I will be able to table it in the next session. So that's one of the things I want to do. There are two others, and I don't want to talk too much, that I'm working on that I would like to share with you. So I have spoken about the impact of web giants on Canadian broadcasters and the arts and culture sector, but there's another sector which is very heavily impacted by the web giants, and it's the media, our Canadian media, for a couple of different reasons, but I mean mainly two reasons. One, companies like Facebook and Google will use articles that they will take from the Toronto Star, the Vancouver Sun, the Globe and Mail, CBC, and the money they give to Canadian media company for the use of this material is simply not fair. Like there's no way this could be deemed fair by any true sense of the word. And in fact, the French and Australian equivalent of our Competition Bureau in Canada both came to the conclusion that it's not fair. So that's one thing. The other thing is, as I was saying earlier, Facebook and Google are swallowing about 90% of the ad revenues out there. And those ad dollars used to be invested in our Canadian media companies. So media are suffering throughout the country, and we've lost many, unfortunately. Our government has put in place a number of measures which in total are beyond over $700 million, but it's not enough. And it's really to try and help, temporary help for a longer term crisis. And so the second bill I want to table, and I'm working with some of our colleagues, Minister Lametti at Justice and Minister Baines as well, table a bill that would be inspired by what Australia and France are doing, and soon enough, I'm pretty sure other European countries, to tell Facebook and Google, let's sit down together and hammer out an agreement where Canadian media can be fairly compensated for the use of their product by you, and you are making lots of money on that. And clearly, this won't be easy. We've seen Facebook threaten the Australian government that if they went ahead with that piece of legislation, they would cut all links between Facebook and Australian media companies. They haven't done it. They've threatened to do it, and they haven't threatened to do it in Canada if we do it as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did. So I think it's going to be a tough battle, and we will need Canadians to rally behind us and say enough is enough. And we're only asking them to do their fair share. And we are talking with France and Australia, and I think soon enough there will be enough countries around the world, including Canada, wanting to do something similar that it will become impossible for them to start boycotting everybody. It's one thing for Facebook to say you're boycotting Australia. Can you boycott Australia and France and Canada and maybe soon enough a bunch of other European countries? I don't think so. And in fact, interestingly enough, Google has taken a much lower profile in this whole file. And in France, they are sitting down with the French government and the French Association of Editors, which represent media, to look at what such an agreement would look like. So instead of kicking and screaming, they're sitting at the table. And the third thing that I'm working on regarding these companies is the whole issue of online hate, child pornography, because we've tried letting these companies police themselves. We've tried that for many years, and clearly it's a failure. When you look at polling that have been done across the country and elsewhere around the world, people don't believe they can do that. People see hateful content online all the time. I myself did the experience on Instagram regarding child pornography, 5 minutes. Took me about 5 minutes, and I'm not an expert on Instagram. My kids are, I'm not. But it took me 5 minutes to very easily find child pornography, which is out in the open on Instagram. Like, it's not even hidden. So clearly they can't be left to themselves to police these things. I think it is up to us, governments, to do this, because I don't think it will happen otherwise. In terms of the last two bills, I can't give you or the people participating in this call a timeline, because there's still a lot of work to be done, but we are working hard to bring those bills and to table them as fast as possible. So I would stop there and be happy to take any questions or comments that people might have.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, that's a very complex menu of initiatives there, Stephen, and I know that our participants are going to be quite interested in asking you questions about that. A few have popped up already on the chat function. Before we turn it over to questions, I wanted to let you know that the election has just been called in British Columbia. So for those on the at the brunch that weren't aware of that, we're going to be in a provincial election. We are now in a provincial election, but that does not have a substantive impact on what we're talking about here. So we can all check our news feeds after this conversation to catch up. So thanks very much, and that's great, setting the table of all of those complex ways in which we can have I think the word fair stuck out at me, Stephen. The idea that the web giants pay their fair share, and I am under no illusion that this is going to be easy, because they have a lot of weight and a lot of incentive to push back and continue to be free to do their own thing and not support countries' essential arts and culture and media. So with that, David, are you curating the questions? I'll turn back to you.
I am, thank you. So for our participants and attendees, thank you. And thank you, Minister Guilbeault, for the very illuminating discussion, very informative and very interesting, very exciting times. So for any folks who would like to send questions to our speakers, please put them into the question and answer chat box, and our office team will triage them through to me. I will ask the question, and we'll point it at one of our two amazing speakers here. So we will move ahead we'll move ahead now. So the first question is from Gary in Vancouver Quadra. This is to Minister Guilbeault and to Minister Murray, sorry. The question is, can we require much greater transparency and accountability in the click-through agreements to which users agree to access these large-scale web services, thinking Facebook, Google, Amazon, Netflix, that type of organization?
It's a really good question. One thing that the European Union did in its directive regarding web giants is include this concept of informed consent. So it's not enough to simply ask for people's permission by clicking on these forms that even professional intellectual property lawyers wouldn't understand, or very few would. So simple people like us just can't. So the European Union is moving ahead with forcing these companies to present their customers with forms that are understandable by just about everybody, because it is absolutely an issue. I think people accept those without really understanding what's at stake, and these forms are so complicated that even if someone was to try to understand what it means, it'd be difficult to figure it out.
Okay.
Well, David, I don't have anything to add on that. I mean, this is the complexity of Minister Guilbeault's portfolio. I mean, the only comment I would have is, as the Minister of Digital Government, it's very much about government services to Canadians and government's IT. So even though I'm interested in the digital aspects of our industry and external activities, that's not my area of expertise. So I think most of these questions will go to Stephen. Thanks.
There's a question from David from Vancouver as well. The question is, given the importance of Canadian culture in the vast and powerful US media landscape, are there any intentions to address a crisis at the National Film Board of Canada? Sorry.
We have made a substantial increase in the funding in the NFB. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was in 2016 or 2017. But I think we need to do more. The NFB has moved its headquarters from where it was for almost 50 years to a new building in downtown Montreal, and it was a costly move. It was required that the old building wasn't adequate for today's new type of production. They needed something more modern, but we need to do so. We've helped them. We've increased their funding, but I think we need to do more. So this is a conversation I will have to have with the finance minister. I'm not saying it's a done deal, but I will be working on it.
There is another question from Vancouver. The majority of these questions will probably be from Vancouver residents, but the question is from Rosalind, and the question is, how do antitrust laws work in Canada, and can they be used to regulate big web giants?
That's a very good question. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm not an expert. I'm not knowledgeable at all about antitrust laws. It's not something within my purview. So I don't know if we could apply that. I know there are discussions in the U.S. about that regarding some of these companies, but I don't know about Canada. Good question.
Well, that's the kind of thing that as you're collaborating with the Ministry of Justice and Minister Lametti, that he will probably be able to provide some input into that.
Good point.
There is another question. This one, I'm not sure the name, but the question is, from Ian, sorry. Is there a potential arrangement that could require a certain percentage of Canadian content on Netflix if there isn't one already that does exist?
There isn't one, and the way we are envisioning our regulation is that companies would have spending requirements in Canadian production. So investing in Canadian artists, Canadian storytelling, Canadian producers. So if you're Netflix and you're investing in this, chances are you will put it on your platform. We want to be, in terms of the result, we're pretty clear what we want. I mean, instead of a $1 billion decrease in funding, we're envisioning hundreds of millions of more dollars invested in Canada so we can tell our own stories, with a special attention being paid to Indigenous production, to BIPOC production, to minority language production as well. So if you're Netflix and you're investing, then you would most likely put it on your platform. Different companies have different business models, and we've tried to be mindful of that. Disney, for example, Disney invests in Disney content. They don't invest in Canadian content or Canadian storytelling. So their spending requirement would be different, and you would be unlikely to find on Disney Plus channel, stuff about Canada unless it was a Disney production, because that's how they do this. If you're Spotify, the way you would conform with your regulatory obligation is to ensure that musicians or people who write music would be better paid through your system. So we've tried to look at the broad range of companies and business model and find different ways that would make sense for them to invest. But so they will have flexibility in terms of how they do it, but for us, the goal is very clear. It's more money for Canadian artists.
Excellent. Minister Murray, do you have anything to add there? No? Okay.
Well, more money for Canadian artists is good. I mean, the thing that I've learned in political life is that nothing is as simple as it seems on the surface. So it's good to have a particular outcome, and then it's going to be complicated how to get there. And I think one of those complexities has to do with the size and power of the organizations that we're aiming to regulate. And so the question that I had about the possibility to actually be successful with it, Stephen, you were answering in the beginning, and that's that enough countries are prepared to be brave on this, that at a certain point, the leverage that the web giants have of cutting you out as a country, it's not going to be as attractive a retaliatory tool as they may have thought it would be in the beginning.
Yeah.
This next question is from Jost in Vancouver Quadra. The question is, what positive incentives can be established for web giants to bring them to the table in order to create an emotional investment for Canadian content and thus be more beneficial to the Canadian market?
I would like to think we'd be able to bring them to the table with emotions. I'm afraid we will have to bring them to the table with dollars, their dollars. What you've seen in Europe, for example, and those people interested in what Europe has done, the overall regulation in Europe encompassing all of these things. It's called the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which has been in place now for a couple of years, and that's why France, based on that, that's why France adopted its own regulation regarding media and web giants. And what we've seen in Europe is that if companies don't comply with European regulations, then they can be fined and severely fined. And it's happening. If they don't comply with EU regulation, they can be fined. So that's certainly one avenue that we would be looking at.
Excellent. We have a question from Nancy in Vancouver, Quadra. As demonstrated last night with the Emmys, I believe it could be the wrong award show. I apologize if that's the case. We have a great source of Canadian content and news in Canada in the CBC. What is your action plan for providing more funding and good governance for the CBC? We fundamentally believe in the role and the importance of CBC and Radio-Canada in this country. We've made record level investment in the previous mandate in CBC after severe cutbacks under the Conservative government of Stephen Harper, and according to his campaign promises, the same would happen with Aaron O'Toole. He has promised to slash the funding budget of the CBC. This is something we're looking at very closely. Earlier in the year, there was a report done by a panel that looked at the whole issue of broadcasting and telecommunication. It's called the Yale Report. In it, they did look at CBC and made some proposal regarding the funding of CBC along the lines of we should make CBC free of any publicity. And as a huge fan of CBC and Radio-Canada, I can certainly see some of the benefits. I also have some concern because part of what kept CBC going when the Harper government cut its funding was the fact that it was able to go and get ad dollars for their budgets because they could have publicity. So if we were to make CBC entirely dependent on government funding, we have to find ways, and it's really difficult to do because in our democracy, our government are sovereign if they want to adopt new laws so we have to think of creating ways where we could ensure the continuity of the CBC should a new government that's not too friendly to the CBC would come into place. So this is clearly something that's on my radar screen, and we are looking at different models around the world and what do we think could work in Canada or what wouldn't work in Canada. So I don't have an answer for you yet, but it's certainly an area of great concern and great interest to us as well.
Well, can I just ask a follow-up question there, Stephen, with respect to your comment about CBC and how governments are sovereign, and so we can do something that we believe is in the interest of Canadians, and another government can change that altogether. Do you see any vulnerability around what you're proposing in terms of regulating the web giants and providing CRTC potentially a role in that, or the application of fines should the agreement be breached? Do you see that as something that another government might want to undo, or are all of the parties pretty much aligned when you've had discussions with the opposition members? Where are they at with what you're proposing?
So that's a good question, Joyce. I think that by and large, certainly the Greens, the NDP, the Bloc agree with our approach. They may not agree with everything that will be in the bill. They will probably ask for certain changes, but I think overall there's high level of agreement, and we tend to see pretty much eye to eye on these things. In case of the Conservative Party, I'm having a really hard time understanding what they're proposing, and I think they're having a hard time understanding what they're proposing as well. So Mr. O'Toole, I think, said that he would want to cut GST to everybody, but that doesn't solve. I mean, say we cut the GST to Canadian broadcasters and to Netflix and to the others, doesn't solve the fact that if we don't find ways of making sure that these web giants invest in Canadian arts and culture, they will be $1 billion less 3 years from now. That being said, if we are successful in modernizing the Broadcasting Act, as I said, it hadn't been done since the early 90s. So chances are we'll be okay for a while. That's my hope. And I think that once the system in place, I think it would be hugely unpopular, even in more right-wing circles, to come and undo that, because they would clearly see the benefit. I mean, who doesn't think that Facebook and Google should do their fair share? There are those individuals out there, but I think that by and large, Canadians agree with that.
The next question has come from a couple of our constituents. I'm not going to mention names because it's 5 different names, and it keeps coming through. Can you further unpack, Minister Guilbeault, the issue of taxing, sorry, I'm just trying to merge all the questions into one, the potential issue of taxing multinational corporations, or how does it possibly work to tax the income of multinational corporations like Netflix, Google, Facebook, that type of thing that don't necessarily have a base here? Okay.
Well,
it's the Netflix tax question.
Yeah, and we're not. No one is suggesting that we impose a tax on Netflix specifically. So what I've talked about, it's not taxation. What I will be doing has nothing to do with taxation. Having said that, we during the last election campaign in our platform, we had committed to do a couple of things on the taxation side of things regarding these companies. The first commitment we've made is to make sure that they would all pay the GST, which they don't do right now. And it's quite fascinating that these companies have somehow managed to make us believe that it would be really complicated to tax them. I mean, we have a number, like hundreds, probably thousands of multinational companies that operate in Canada that pay GST, that pay corporate taxes. Like, there's nothing new. We're not inventing some new thing here. But these companies have been very clever in somehow making us believe that, oh, we can't do it for them. If we can do it for any other international corporation operating in Canada, why can't we do it for Netflix, Facebook, or Google? To me, that doesn't make any sense. The Prime Minister, in an interview on the end of 2019, an interview on Radio-Canada, had said that he anticipated that the GST would be imposed on all of these companies come the next budget. Now, obviously, because of COVID, that budget still hasn't come. But based on the Prime Minister's comment, I would be very comfortable to say that I would anticipate as well that this will be in the next federal budget. We still don't know when that, unless you have information I don't have, Joyce, but I don't know when the next budget's going to be.
Thank you very much, Minister. So I think that this will be our last question time-wise. It's a bit of a long question, so I'll give the background and then the question. This is from Cameron in Vancouver Quadra. There are those in the US government who are arguing that more social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook have been involved in the editing and curating of certain content on their websites. They've taken on the role of a publisher rather than simply a forum for sharing on information. If social media giants are treated like publishers and responsible for their content, they would be liable for their content, which would help address your goals on reduction of hate speech and so on. What are your thoughts on this? Would this potentially interfere with free speech? And is it something that we might ever consider possibly in Canada?
I mean, the whole issue of regulating online hate it's not a slam dunk. It's a delicate one. It does bring into the foray issues of free speech. so it's something we have to move on. We absolutely have to move on this, but we have to do it carefully. That being said, I mean, we have free speech in the real world, but over the years, our judicial system has put parameters around this. I mean, we have free speech in Canada, but that doesn't mean that you can preach hate, that you can incite people to terrorism, that you can promote child pornography. So conceptually, the idea is to do on the internet what we're doing in the real world. Now, as Joyce pointed out earlier, it is easier said than done. It will require a lot of work, but we are working on this. There's a number of ministers involved in this, and I'm confident that we will be able to do it. But be assured that some on the right will claim that we're trying to take free speech away from them, which is not at all what we're trying to do. But there will be those who will say that.
David, there was a question that came from Dan Edwards that I thought was an interesting one that I'd like to hear Stephen's thoughts on. I mean, it's not as much about the arts and cultural industries as a fundamental question, but essentially what Dan says is he talks about a recent documentary called The Social Dilemma, in which experts in the field state that social media platforms are not just passive, but are active participants in the destruction of democratic discourse. And so they're saying that is an arena that governments should be paying attention to. How can they rein in how social media platforms narrow down and divide social discourse? If we are to have vibrant democracies. So I guess since you've been digging deeply into the social media platforms and how they impact our society, what are your thoughts? I mean, do you share that view that this is a dangerous direction in terms of narrowing and curating what people see and having the just all of the divisive repercussions of social media groupings where you tend to read and see the things you already agree with, and then maybe are drawn down some more radical paths of thinking on those things. So what's your thought about our democracy and the social media of today?
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, I think that if we do not act, our democracy in the longer term, not overnight, but our democracy is threatened. I don't think these companies are out to get democracy. I think these companies are out to make as much money as they can in any way they see fit. If it means, in some cases, selling personal data to third party, and then they, regardless of what those third parties do, i.e. try to manipulate election results, they would claim, listen, I didn't do that. You know, I only sold those data. I wasn't involved in trying to manipulate democracies, which is why we need to put safeguards around these things. We need to be there to protect. I mean, you know what they say: data is the new oil. Data will be to the economy of the 21st century what oil was to the economies of the 19th and 20th century. And I think it is up to us to put in place safeguards to ensure that, you know, when data is used, it is used with your consent, prior and informed consent, that you know what it's used for and who it's used for and to what purpose. And right now, this is not the case. And I think we need to change that.
I just would, I mean, I appreciate your understanding of that and your perspective, and I would add that the idea that with social media, with like Facebook and Instagram and so on, you, the participant, is the product. So it's the people who are on the social media are the product, and what is being sold is their attention. So what you do is being tracked so that the advertisers can present you with something that you will spend time on or click on. So they're essentially buying your attention and paying that money to the social media giant, and you're the product. So it just helped me to think about it from that perspective, because as long as I know I'm the product and it's my attention that's for sale, it gives me a different perspective on how to interact with social media. Anyway, I know that we're coming towards the end of our session, and David is chomping at the bit to do a poll. Is that right? Do you have some questions? Nope, no questions
Nope.
for our participants this time?
Nope, they got off lucky this time around.
Okay, well, so unless there's something else that you have on the schedule there, David, I would like to just go right into my thanks to Minister Guilbeault. So thank you, Stephen, for taking the time to bring your perspective, a unique perspective as the National Minister of Heritage, who has the key responsibility for how Canada interacts with the web giants, and how we can make sure that there's a fair system, and that they're paying their fair share, and that they are a positive for Canadian society and democracy as a whole, a safe and a safe venue for us. I mean, there's so many aspects to this, and I can only imagine how much work goes into thinking it through, consulting, discarding ideas that seem good on the surface, but when you dig down, it's more complicated than that. So really want to tell you how much I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Thank you, David, and thank you everybody who joined. This was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, really good questions, and we may just take those questions and see if Minister Guilbeault, if your staff may have some thoughts to answer ones that we didn't get to today, then we can also post that, and people can check back and see your thoughts on some of the questions that we weren't able to get to.
Sure.
So thanks again for being part of this, and thank you to everybody. Thank you to each of you for being part of this discussion. We'll be doing another one on in October. We haven't nailed down the topic yet, but I think I'm going to wait and see about the framing of the next steps for our government in the throne speech, and then we may pick one of the key themes from that and dive into it more fully. So congratulations, by the way, Minister Guilbeault, on being the first federal cabinet minister to be part of our program here in Vancouver Quadra. And thank you for, I mean, these are nonpartisan events, and so your nonpartisanship was very appreciated. Of course, there's comments that we can articulate on differences amongst parties, but this was a very fair and neutral take on the landscape of the heritage situation vis-a-vis the web giants. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
great day.